This is section 8.2. We're going to be talking about simple interest. Interest is the dollar amount that we get paid for lending money or that we have to pay for borrowing money. So we talk about interest in both ways, money that we get or money that we have to pay. The amount of money that we deposit or borrow, depending on the situation, is called the principal. The amount of interest depends on the principal, the interest rate, and this is always given as a percent, and it changes from bank to bank. So it's not a set interest rate across the board. And the length of time in which the money is deposited. So you're going to get a different amount of interest if you deposit money for 5 years versus if you deposit money for 30 years. Simple interest is important to keep in mind. Simple interest involves interest calculated only on the principal. Only on the principal. To calculate simple interest, we're going to take the principal times the rate times the time. Anytime we say rate, we're talking about the interest rate. The rate R is expressed as a decimal when we plug that into the calculator. So let's suppose you deposit $2,000 in a savings account and it has an interest rate of 6%. Find the interest at the end of the first year. Okay, so we're just looking for the interest. So interest is equal to the principal times the rate times the time. The principal is what we're depositing, so we're depositing $2,000. We're going to multiply that times the interest rate, which is 6%. And the 6% we have to write it as a decimal, so 0.06. And the amount of time, that's always in years. So we want the interest after the first year, so that would be 1 year. So when we calculate that, we get $120. The interest, if you deposit $2,000 at 6% for 1 year, would be $120. And by the way, no bank ever pays 6% interest for a savings account. It'd be more like 0.006%. This works the same way if you're borrowing. So let's suppose you borrow $1,800 for 2 years. The interest rate is 8%. Find the interest of the loan. So interest is principal times rate times time. So we have 1,800. We multiply times the 8%, which is 0.08. Don't forget the 0. And this time it's for 2 years, so we multiply that times 2. And we get $288. So because the bank loaned us money, we have to pay them an extra $288 on top of the $1,800 that we already have to return. So okay, now we're going to talk about what we call future value. Future value is the principal plus the interest. The future value, we always call that A, is, if we use simple interest rate, we use this formula right here. The principal, parentheses 1 plus R times T. T is always given in years, and R, of course, is the interest rate. Another name for P is present value. So we either call it principal or present value, just kind of depends on the circumstance. So let's suppose we have a loan of $1,060 and the interest rate is 6.5%. for 3 months. Be careful here, this is 3 months. Remember, the formula is for the number of years. So we want to find the future value. So future value, that's A. P is what we deposit or what we borrow. 1 plus the interest rate, 0.065. Remember, you got to move the decimal 2 places. Times 3 months. Well, you have to figure out what part of a year is 3 months. You know we have 3 months, and you know there are 12 months in a year. So we have 3/12 of a year, or you can reduce that to 1/4 of a year. So when you multiply the interest rate, 0.065, you got to multiply that times 1/4. When we do this, remember when you're calculating this in your calculator, you want to take this one step at a time. You got to use the order of operations. So make sure you do inside the parentheses first. And inside the parentheses, we have a multiplication. So you're going to multiply the interest rate times the time first. That's the very first thing you do. Keep that number in your calculator. Do not round. Do not write it down. Just keep it in your calculator. Then add 1. Again, you don't need to write it down. You keep that number in your calculator. Do not round it. And then multiply by 1060. And that will give you your answer. The answer is the only number that you round. Okay? Do not round any number before then. So the future value would be $1,077.23. When doing these problems, we always round to the nearest cent. Okay, so 2 decimal places. Now, you borrow $2,500. You promise to pay it back at $2,655 in 6 months. The question is, what's the interest rate? So you're going to use the same formula. A is the future value. Well, A is what you're going to pay back. So you have $2,655. That's your future value. That's A. P is the principal. So that would be $2,500. 1 plus R, we don't know R, times the time. That's 6 months, and so that's 1/2 of a year. Okay. So now we have to solve for R. I don't know how good you are at algebra, but there's a couple different ways you can do this. Probably the easiest way would be to divide both sides by 2,500, so you don't have to worry about that. Divide both sides by 2,500. By dividing both sides by 2,500, you're able to cancel the 2,500 on the right-hand side. So right now, this is not the time to put it in the calculator yet, so you're going to leave it as 2,655 over 2,500 is equal to 1 plus, I'm going to put the 1/2 in front of the R. Okay, you're solving for R. So you've got the 1/2 on the same side as R, and you got the 1 on the same side as R. Remember, it's kind of reverse of what you would expect with order of operations. We don't multiply or divide first, we add or subtract. So we have to subtract the 1. So subtract 1 from both sides. So right now, I'm going to write a little bit smaller, 2,655 over 2,500, subtract 1 is equal to 1/2 R. Again, still not time for your calculator. You got to wait until we're completely done solving for R. And now we have 1/2 times R to get rid of the 1/2. Opposite of times is divide. But this is a fraction, so Easiest way to do this is multiply both sides by 2. Multiply both sides. And be careful here. You're not just multiplying the fraction by 2. You're multiplying both sides of the equal sign by 2. So don't forget the parentheses. So now we have 2 parentheses 2655 over 2500. Subtract the 1 is equal to, hold on, there we go, is equal to r. This is where we put it in the calculator, inside parentheses first. So we're going to take the 2655 and divide it by 2500. That will give us a decimal. Keep that number in your calculator. Subtract the 1. Keep that number in your calculator. Multiply by 2, and there you have your interest rate. So you will get an interest rate as a decimal, 0.124, and I want the interest rate as a percent, so you would move the decimal 2 places. So the answer for the interest rate is 12.4%. Some lenders collect interest from the amount of the loan at the time the loan is made. This is called a discounted loan. The interest that is deducted from the loan is the discount. So you borrow $10,000 on a 10% discounted loan for a period of 8 months. What is the loan's discount? Determine the net amount of money you receive, and what is the loan's actual interest rate. So basically what they do is say, we're going to loan you $10,000, but we're not actually going to cut a check for $10,000. We're going to give you less than that. And the difference between the $10,000 that you're borrowing and the amount of the check that we give you is the amount that you're paying actually in the interest. So to figure out the discount, that's principal times rate times time. So it's $10,000. The interest rate is 10%, and the time is 2/3 of a year. Remember, it's 8 months. 8 months out of 12 is 2/3. So we multiply that, and that gives us our interest rate of $666.67. But like I said, instead of giving us a check for $10,000, they're going to take the interest up front. So they're going to subtract off the $666, subtract off the $666, and the amount of the check, the money that you actually receive, is $9,333.33. Okay, so you're paying the interest ahead of time by receiving less money than you're actually borrowing. Now, as far as your actual interest rate, so the interest is $66.67. We already calculated that. The amount of money we're getting, that the principal in this case, is $93.33, sorry. We don't know what the interest rate, and we know what the time is. So we substitute these numbers into the formula and calculate. So even though the bank tells us it's an interest rate of 10%, the actual interest rate for this loan is 10.7%. So it's actually a little bit more than advertised, if you will. I want you to do the homework 4 through 36.